This episode of Tim's Enthusiast Garage is brought to you by 44 Tools. 44 Tools is the industry's leading supplier of tent tools, paint protection film tools, vinyl wrap tools, and detail supplies to body shops, tent shops, and direct-to-consumer on their website at 44tools.com. They're also launching a new YouTube channel with videos on how to tent, how to install paint protection film, about the tools, and they're all narrated by me. Check them out at 44tools.com. You can also find them on Instagram at 44tools. Since its introduction, I've always been in love with the L322 Range Rover. To my eye, they really hit it out of the park with the L322. It's the perfect mix of luxury and go-anywhere ruggedness that's as ready for a night on the town as it is for a day of snowy adventures. It's that duality that I love about the Range Rover.
Doing stuff that you do with a pickup truck, but in a luxury SUV. So the question is, should you buy an L322 Range Rover? I've owned P38s, Classics, and several L322s. This is an 04 L322 with the BMW 4.4 liter V8. Now, lots of positive things have been written about this vehicle, lots of negative things have been written about this vehicle. So far, in my ownership tenure with this vehicle, I'm 50-50. Let me break down ownership history for you, and we'll talk about whether or not the L322 makes sense in your collection.
While the Range Rover Classic, the original Range Rover, had quite a long run, the P38 had a very stunted run. It was deemed not sexy enough, and not revolutionary enough, and not classic enough. The L322 aimed to right that. For the first time, they went away from body on frame and instead designed a brand new monocoque. And with that new monocoque, unibody chassis, they designed and distilled down each of the Classic's poignant design language pieces into what was now the new Land Rover Range Rover design language. These vents in the side have become ubiquitous, even with the new Rover. And I think it's a handsome vehicle from pretty much every angle. I love the lights front and rear. I love how Bauhaus the design is. It's very square and bluff. And to me, it definitely looks better than a P38. Now, ironically, when I talk to younger people about the P38, like my son says the P38 is his favorite Range Rover. So I think maybe they got a little bit eager to sort of toss that design out and should have maybe given it a little more time. But the L322 had a long run, and they're used, they're inexpensive. And now I think it's something that we need to talk about in terms of being, is it a good used buy? And that's what this video is for. One thing it's important to note here from the outset is that this video primarily covers the early L322 that uses the BMW Rover running gear and communication systems. Later vehicles used Ford Jaguar running systems, and they're quite a bit different, so bear that in mind as you watch this video and as you look for your L322.
Now the story of the L322 Range Rover is, again, even after the P38, overly complex vehicles. There's a lot of things in this vehicle that aren't associated with making it better. One thing that I'd say that's associated with that is the complexity of the air suspension. This car doesn't ride particularly soft, and it's one of those things where I just don't know that that's worth all the mechanical hubbub. There are companies that make replacement springs for the L322. Included with that spring kit is an electric component to make it so that your dash doesn't completely chime out that the air suspension is faulted. And that's nice. And honestly, I've driven a truck with that air suspension replacement kit, and it drives every bit as well as one on air suspension. Very rarely do you need the ability to go up and down, and I think if anything, higher than sort of the average level of the vehicle is pretty much where you want to be. On On a day like today where the roads are snow covered, this is a day when you really want to own a Range Rover. This thing will go anywhere, and Land Rover did a fantastic job engineering the all-wheel drive system. Great traction control, and honestly, I haven't experienced anything other than fantastic traction in one of these vehicles in all circumstances. If you've done any reading or any research on this vehicle, you know that this particular 4.4 liter V8 from BMW is a good engine in many respects, but there are some foibles that can go awry. And with this vehicle, though it did come with a superlative one owner full service history, I still had to do some of the things that are very common on this vehicle. One of those things is the oil separator and PCV is like a whole unit on the back of the engine. Lots of hoses and things go into it, and it is one of those things that will need serviced. I had to service it, you'll have to service it. Not the end of the world, but it's something to consider. Additionally, oil leaks are a thing. I've done the valve cover gaskets. No doubt those were exacerbated by the additional crankcase ventilation pressure caused by the other issues I had. Nevertheless, those are things that you should consider when buying this car, is that things like Vanos and the oil separator are things that will need to be thought about and done to keep this car in perfect fettle. One thought is that these cars are real early in the CAN bus era. So in other words, there's a lot of communication going on between systems on this vehicle. And honestly, noise on the CAN bus is one of the areas where this car has a lot of gremlin possibilities. Now, it is simply noise on the CAN bus, so some of those issues can be a lot scarier, like error messages that really are superfluous and due to, again, noise on that bus. What I'd say is this vehicle had a replacement stereo system, and these stereo systems are not great to start with. And it's one of those things where introducing like fog lights or other electrical pieces to this car need to be carried out by a professional. A lot of what I've seen in the forums, kind of the nightmare situations with vehicles like this, are cars that have cut up wiring. And if you find one like that and don't really feel comfortable with it, then by all means walk away. I've been pretty fastidious with the service on this Range Rover, and there's been a lot of issues. I won't sugarcoat that. I'm still getting a check engine light, yay, for the fact that there is evaporative emissions code. The L322 Range Rover came about with a bit of an unholy union between BMW and Rover. Now, many of you know I'm much more of an Audi Volkswagen guy than a BMW guy, and it's one of those things where this particular vehicle does suffer from the fact that BMW made some of the car's systems overly complex. And being a Land Rover to start with, it wasn't like it necessarily needed more complexity. On the further complexity situation in this vehicle, the climate control is another area where in cars like this and the S-Class and the Audi A8, it's one of those things where it's like, you know, all we really want is the climate control to function. Blow hot air, blow cool air, that's about it. Dual zone, okay, that's cool. In a lot of these cars from this era, and still to this day, there's this thing where you can make individual of the climate control. So in other words, if you set the passenger to one temperature and the driver to another temperature, you can also adjust the center vents, which I just find superfluous. And it's one of those things where blend doors and motors can fail on this vehicle, and it's something to consider that overly complex engineering and overly complex systems that do make it a joy to drive when everything's working perfectly are one of the things that can compound cost of ownership. Now, these things are so cheap right now that it's kind of a no-brainer. What I paid for this vehicle, again, it's in that range where it's like 10% or less of what the vehicle was new. And if you really want one of these vehicles, then I say by all means, there's enough things about them that are charming and intriguing that make them good long-term ownership propositions. As far as owning this particular car, an 04 versus an 05 or an 06, I particularly like the exterior styling of the early 03 and 04 L322 Range Rovers. That's totally up to you. One area where I may be in the minority with this vehicle is the engine. I actually like the BMW 4.4 liter V8, and in this tune, in this vehicle, I feel like it's ironically one of the best places they ever used the engine. But it's been used in a bunch of BMWs, and to some extent more reliable in this vehicle than in some of the BMWs where it was used. So for me, this engine definitely isn't a deal breaker on this vehicle. Also, it makes a great sound, and from owning a P38 in a Classic, nice engine note is not something that I remember. 4.2 liter, 3.9 liter, 4.6, all of the guises in which the Range Rover engine and even the one in the Discovery was made, it's kind of a gravelly engine. It doesn't make a sweet note, and it's one of those things where this engine does pull, it does have decent power, and it's much less mechanically complicated than the later supercharged engines. So while you will have a few things to potentially do, this car, again, full service history, 70,000 miles, has yet to have chain guides fail. I know that can be one of the issues on these vehicles. So do the service. I think with any vehicle, there's certain things that you're going to have to do, and so known maintenance, known issues are something you should be aware of, but shouldn't necessarily keep you away from the vehicle. I think that the powertrain in these vehicles is pretty good. Swap it to coils and enjoy it. So, if you've come here to hear that you shouldn't buy one of these vehicles, I just can't do it. You know, this car, to me, when I see a clean L322, particularly an early one, with its extremely square lights, extremely bluff grille, and those sorts of features, it kind of feels elegant in a way that, I'm not saying it's exactly like it, but I'm saying it's similar in some ways to the elegance and timelessness of a Classic, and it's way better as a modern car than a Classic, and similar in some ways, and again, not exactly, to that of a G-Wagon. And both of those vehicles, the Classic is now ironically more expensive than this vehicle, and will only continue to increase in value. And the G-Wagon is impossibly expensive compared with this vehicle. So you really get something with this vehicle that you don't get anywhere else. So if you really love this car, if when you see this shape, you're like, man, that just does something for me. Like, look, you can tow things with this vehicle. You can take your family to the ski slopes for the weekend in style in this car. There's great legroom in the back. And again, for me, I think this is the ideal year. I like the styling cues on the early trucks. So for me, this one works best. For you, it may be something different. Certainly the later L322s that kind of get a little more glitzy, particularly in the very end of the line. I don't like the exterior styling. It doesn't really do much for me, but they did get more reliable as they went on. That being said, again, there's a value to these that these things will go the miles. I mean, there's a lot. If you look on the used car reports, there's a bunch of these out there with 150, 200,000 miles on this powertrain. If you can find one like this with 70 or 80,000 miles, I think you've got a great basis for a car that you can enjoy for a long time and really put it to good use, and will probably be a car that you'll have great memories of in the future. Or if you try to cheap out on the service and stuff, you will not have great memories. It will ruin your bank account, and that's no good. So again, buying a good one, always the best policy.
So in general, what's the takeaway? I mean, the takeaway is that the L322 is a pretty captivating vehicle. Now there are foibles. Electrical gremlins are going to plague each and every Land Rover from this era. That's just a fact. Interior sticky pieces and bad coatings on a European vehicle from this era also is going to be an issue. The rear upper tailgate can rust, so check that out. But overall, there's a lot of aluminum used in the construction of this vehicle, and overall, the vehicle construction itself is extremely stout. So it's mostly the mechanical aspects that we discussed in this video that you need to look out for. Will they go up in value? Will you enjoy it? I think absolutely. These are pretty compelling vehicles. You can tow with it, you can do a lot of different things with it, and it's extremely British. And that is cool. So drive what you love, and if you love an L322, check one out. Don't forget to visit timsenthusiastgarage.com, where I've got merchandise, blog posts, everything you want to get closer to the cars that I feature in the series. Also, check out Motorvice, a live Tim's Enthusiast Garage production that focuses on 80s and 90s vehicles, and go to motorviceshow.com to get tickets or to get this sick M1 poster.